Hello again. If you noticed in the last video, I am a little bit stuffy today. It is allergy season in addition to being keep yourself isolated from the rest of the world season. So my nose is all up here and I'm a little sinusy. I have to go take my allergy medicine. So I'm sorry that my voice sounds extra deep today. It's a thing. I can't help it. So we are Witch of Blackbird Pond. Well, it's a glare. Here we go. Witch of Blackbird Pond, Chapter 2, Part 2. Part 1 is being uploaded as I speak. So here we go, page 21. On the seventh morning, Captain Eaton resorted to a curious device which John Holbrook called walking up the river. Two sailors in a small boat went some distance ahead, bearing a long rope fastened to a small anchor. Rowing as far as the rope would stretch, they dropped the anchor. On the deck of the ship, the crew lined up, 10 hardy men bared to the waist, each grasping the rope, and began a rhythmical march from one end of the ship to the other. As one man reached the end, he dropped the rope and raced back to grasp it again at the end of the line. Painfully, almost imperceptibly, the Dolphin inched forward through the water. In an hour's time they had reached the anchor, and the rowboat went ahead a second time. Over and over, hour after hour, the men moved, hauling the ship by the sheer force of straining muscle and gasping breath. Sweat poured down their arms and shoulders. The agonizing slowness was harder to endure than no motion at all. Kit shuddered away from the sight of those lunging bodies. A hot spring sun beat down without relief. She twitched her own shoulders fretfully under the silk that stuck clammily against her skin. In the heat, the stench of the horses steamed up from the depths of the hold, as though the animals were still there. This morning the cook had refused to spare her enough water even for a decent bath. It was almost too much to bear when she heard a splash directly below her and saw that Nat and two of the other young men had taken advantage of the wait for the rowboat and were thrashing about like porpoises in the river. Nat looked up and caught her wistful eye. "Jump in, why don't you?" he taunted. "You warned me never to do it again," Kit replied incautiously. "Do you need an excuse? I'll shout for help and go under. You couldn't just stand there and watch me drown, could you?" "Yes, I could," Kit laughed in spite of herself, "and I would, too." "Then you can stay there and frizzle," he responded, and he paddled toward the ladder. Kit watched him with both envy and relief. He had sounded as friendly and easy as on that first morning in Saybrook Harbor. As though to prove that the constraint between them was broken, in the next wait for the rowboat, Nat strolled over to join her where she stood watching. "I'll wager you were wishing you had never left Barbados," he said. "'Twas unfair of me to tease you." "How I envied you," she exclaimed, "to get into that water and away from this filthy ship even for a moment." In a split second the squall darkened Nat's blue eyes. "Filthy? The Dolphin?" "Oh," she laughed impatiently, "I know you're forever scrubbing, but that stable smell, I'll never get it out of my hair as long as I live." Nat's indignation found vent in scorn. "Maybe you think it would smell prettier with a hold full of human bodies, half of them rotting in their chains before anyone knew they were dead." Kit recoiled, as much from his angry tone as from the repulsive words. "What are you talking about? People? Down in the hold? I suppose you never knew about slaves on Barbados." "Of course I know. We used to own more than 100. How else could you work a plantation?" "How did you think they got there? Did you fancy they traveled from Africa in private cabins like yours?" She had never thought about it at all. "But don't you have slaves in America?" "Yes, to our shame. Mostly down Virginia way, but there are plenty of fine folk like you here in New England who'll pay a fat price for black flesh without asking any questions how it got here. If my father would consent to bring back just one load of slaves, we would have had our new catch by this summer. But we Eatons, we're almighty proud that our ship has the good, honest stink of horses." Nat was gone again. What a touchy temper he had! She hadn't meant to insult his precious ship. Why did he deliberately turn everything to her disadvantage? He had been just on the point of making friends. Now the trip would probably be over before she could speak to him again. And why should she care? A rude, freckle-faced sailor who took more notice of a strip of canvas than of a brocaded gown. At least John Holbrook knew how to speak with respect. But even John Holbrook did not approve of her completely. She was forever astonishing him. Last night, for instance, she had reached impulsively for the volume he held, opened it at the marked page, and squinting cautiously at the words in the wan light, had read aloud. We are in the first place to apprehend that there is a time fixed and stated by God for the devil to enjoy a dominion over our sinful and therefore woeful world. Toward the end of his time, the descent of the devil in wrath upon the world will produce more woeful effects than would have been in former ages. The death pangs of the devil will make him to be more of a devil than ever he was. Goodness! Kit wrinkled up her nose. Is this what you read all day long? She looked up to find John staring at her. You can read that? He questioned, with the same amazement he had shown when she had proved she could swim. How did you learn to read when you say you just ran wild like a savage and never did any work? Do you call reading work? I don't even remember how I learned. When it was too hot to play, Grandfather would take me into his library where it was dark and cool and read to me aloud from his books, and later I would sit beside him and read to myself while he studied. What sort of books? John's voice was incredulous. Oh, history, and poetry, and plays. Plays! Yes, the plays were the best. Wonderful ones by Dryden and Shakespeare and Otway. Your grandfather allowed a girl to read such things? They were beautiful, those plays. Have you never read them? John's pale cheeks reddened. There are no such books in Saybrook. In Boston, perhaps, but the proper use of reading is to improve our sinful nature and to fill our minds with God's holy word. Kit stared at him. She pictured Grandfather, the blue-veined hands caressing the leather bindings, and she knew that he had not cherished his books with any thought of improving his sinful nature. She could imagine the twinkle that would have danced in his eyes at those solemn words. All the same, the reproof in John Holbrook's voice left her discomforted. Somehow she felt that John was always drawing back, uneasy at this friendship that was growing between them, and she herself was often repelled by the hard uprightness that lay just under his gentle voice and looks. She saw now that she could not tell him about the book she had loved any more than she could make him see the palm trees swaying under a brilliant blue sky. Early the next morning, a contrary breeze came whistling along the river. The Dolphin sprang to life, scudded the last few miles, and bumped against the wharf at Wethersfield Landing. The shore, muffled in thick scarves of drifting mist, looked scarcely different from the miles of unbroken forest that they had seen for the past week. Sailors began vigorously to roll out the great casks of molasses and pile them along the wharf. Two of the men lowered over the side the 7 small leather trunks that held all of Kit's belongings, and piled them one beside the other on the wet planking. Kit clambered down the ladder and stood for the second time on the alien shore that was to be her home. Her heart sank. This was Wethersfield, just a narrow sandy stretch of shoreline, a few piles sunk in the river with rough planking for a platform. Out of the mist jutted a row of cavernous wooden structures that must be warehouses, and beyond that the dense, dripping green of fields and woods. No town, not a house, only a few men and boys and 2 yapping dogs who had come to meet the boat. With something like panic, Kit watched Goodwife Cruff descend the ladder and stride ahead of her husband along the wharf. Prudence, dragging at her mother's hand, gazed back imploringly as they passed. Ma, she ventured timidly, the pretty lady got off here at Wethersfield. Kit summoned the boldness to speak to her. Yes, Prudence, she called clearly, and I hope that I will see you often. Goodwife Cruff halted and glared at Kit. I'll thank you to let my child alone, she spat out. We do not welcome strangers in this town, and you be the kind we like least. Jerking Prudence nearly off her feet, she marched firmly up the dirt road and disappeared in the fog. Even John Holbrook's farewells were abstracted. A formal bow, a polite wish for her pleasant arrival, and he, too, strode eagerly into the fog in quest of his new teacher. Then Kip saw Captain Eaton approaching, and knew the moment had come when the truth would have to be told. There must be some mistake, the captain began. We signaled yesterday that we would reach Wethersfield at dawn. I expected that your aunt and uncle would be here to meet you, no matter how early it might be. Kit swallowed and gathered courage. Captain Eaton, she said boldly, my uncle and aunt can hardly be blamed for not meeting me. You see, well, to be honest, they do not even know that I am coming. The captain's jaw tightened. You gave me to understand that they had sent for you to come. Kit lifted her head proudly. I told you that they wanted me, she corrected him. Mistress Wood is my mother's sister. Naturally, she would always want me to come. Even assuming that to be true, how could you be sure they were still in Connecticut? My Aunt Rachel's last letter came only 6 months ago. He scowled with annoyance. You know very well that I should never have taken you on board had I known this. Now I shall have to take the time to find where your uncle lives and deliver you. But understand, I take no responsibility for your coming. Kit's head went higher. I am entirely responsible for my own coming, she assured him haughtily. Fair enough, the captain responded grimly. Look here, Nat, he turned back. See if 2 hands can be spared to carry this baggage. Kit's cheeks went scarlet. Why should Nat, who had been carefully somewhere else during this whole moment and these last 9 days, have to be so handy now? Now, whatever befell, he was going to be there to witness it, with those mocking blue eyes and that maddening cool amusement. What if Aunt Rachel— But there was no time for doubt now. Between trying to hold up her head confidently and at the same time find a place to set down her dainty kid shoes between the slimy ruts and the mud puddles, Kit had all she could tend to. And then we are done. So, how do you think her aunt and uncle are going to respond to her arriving on their doorstep with no warning? She's been letting everyone think that they know she's coming, and now we find out they have no idea. She's just about to show up out of the blue, all the way from Barbados, which is thousands of miles from Connecticut. Comments below and leave discussion ideas. Talk to you guys tomorrow. See you then.